Welcome back to another episode of Build Your Network. Today, I'm super excited to be sitting down with Colin O'Brady. Colin is a 10-time world record-breaking explorer, speaker, entrepreneur, and expert on mindset. His feats include the world's first solo, unsupported, and fully human-powered crossing of Antarctica, speed records for the Explorers Grand Slam and the Seven Summits, and the first human-powered ocean row across Drake Passage. Colin's highly publicized expeditions have been followed by millions, and his work's been featured by the New York Times, Tonight Show, The Joe Rogan Experience, and The Today Show. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Impossible First, and now The 12-Hour Walk. Invest one day, conquer your mind, and unlock your best life. Colin regularly speaks on mindset and high performance at Fortune 100 companies such as Nike, Google, and Amazon, and at top universities, including Harvard, Yale, and UPenn. His TEDx talk has nearly 3 million views. Guys, you know it's going to be a good interview when the bio by itself takes like 3 minutes just to get through some of the high-level things that these people have gone through. So I'm super stoked today to bring on Colin. What's up, bro? Welcome to the show.
What's up, man? Great to be here with you. Thanks so much for the lengthy intro.
Yeah, of course. So I want to jump right in here and build a little bit of context for those listening, because some of the stuff that you've done is pretty incredible. So I want to know what goes into the forming of your mind at a young age to prompt you to do some of these, kind of more outlandish things that you've done as an adult. So let's go back 12, 13-year-old Colin. Talk to me about what life was like back then.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I think just like in business, just like in life, things are iterative, right? I love, Steve Jobs says you can't connect the dots going forward, but you can connect them going backwards. You look back, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, didn't have a lot of money as a kid, but had parents that were big dreamers. I was actually born on a hippie commune on Olympia, Washington, with my mom invited 30 of her hippie friends over and on a futon. And, she birthed me, and she also played Bob Marley Redemption Song on repeat. So, you could say I came into the world in a somewhat untraditional context.
Yeah. Starting off unconventional.
Exactly. But yeah, 12, 13 years old, I was always an athlete. Swimming and soccer were kind of my main sports. In terms of the outdoors, really, like I said, we didn't have a lot of money, but my dad used to always be like, yo, the outdoors are free. And growing up in Portland, Oregon, you got a lot of access to the outdoors. So, we drive 30 minutes outside the city and go to a trailhead or an alpine lake and things like that. My dad was an Eagle Scout. So I think that there's probably some some essence of that filtered in there as I think about these massive expeditions and adventures that I've now been on and completed. And then also interesting from that age, since you put 13 out there, was an interesting turning point in my childhood, kind of from the world of business, which is my parents. They worked in the health food grocery store industry, basically, which, when I was born in the late 80s, early 90s, that was kind of on the fringes, right? Like sustainable, organic, like these are not words getting thrown around by everyday people in that moment. It's kind of this hippie niche thing. And they've kind of been on the cutting edge of bringing that into more of the mainstream. But when I was 13, they stopped working their normal kind of literal grocery store jobs and said, we want to start our own business. And they started a chain of natural foods grocery stores in the Pacific Northwest, which, well beyond when I was out of the house, was pretty successful for them financially. But the part that I got to witness as a kid wasn't the financial success, but was them sitting there with a dream, starting a business, hustling. Like literally my dinner table conversations, 13, 14, 15 years old, with them sales forecasts and spreadsheets and bouncing ideas off, the literal kitchen table, business and bootstrapping it every step of the way, taking risks. And so when I think about my life, not just through adventures, but following your dreams, following your passion, and building businesses, which is something I've passionately done as well. I definitely think that 13-year-old Colin definitely learned a lot from just observing that as a kid.
Yeah, no kidding. What was education like for you guys in your household? Was it something your parents really like pushed you into or pushed you towards, or was it very much like still in that unconventional vein?
Yeah, so I went to public school. Actually went to Montessori elementary school for a couple years, but most of my education was public school education, downtown Portland. But education was a value, just kind of like an important value. I ultimately went to Yale, so I have an economics degree from Yale. So you could say education was a high degree at that level. But funny enough, that was
from who? Yeah,
yeah. But well, that is funny you say that because I was a swimmer in college, and I was recruited to swim and play soccer. And the Yale swim coach called me. It was the beginning of my senior year of high school, kind of when the recruiting process kicks up. And my mom hands me the phone. The Yale swim coach is on the phone and says, "Hi, this is the coach, the Yale swim coach." And my response was, and I was being dead serious. I was like, I literally said, "Yale, I've heard of that. Where is that?" And my mom's just like shaking her head at me, like, that's not the opening line when these guys call you.
Or maybe it is.
Or maybe it is. It all works out. Yeah. I went there, and that was ultimately a great experience, a great education, no doubt. But honestly, it was also a massive cultural shock for me. Public school kid from Portland, Oregon, shows up in New Haven on this Ivy League campus. In the end, great friends, great relationships, great education, but it was also a massive kind of fish out of water moment for me, just because obviously there's a lot of differences from where I was coming from to be there.
No kidding. What was it? Was it a large adjustment period for you? As you feel like you kind of cut your teeth socially in that first year or two?
Yeah, I'm kind of I was a precocious kid. I have probably overconfident at times, particularly at that point in my life. I was really young when I started college. So just had turned 17. I actually skipped third grade. So I was super young for my grade. But I kind of thought I knew everything. Looking back, I realized how immature I probably was, but it was a culture shock, but also my personality is kind of a little bit of fake it till you make it. At least at that phase of my life, kind of like, oh, this is normal. Oh yeah, whatever. But like in the back of my mind, I was like, what the hell? Where am I? For sure. It took an adjustment.
When you go from growing up and, just going to public school and then you go to a university like Yale, I can only imagine there's an adjustment from high school where you're used to being kind of, the top performer in most things, to going to somewhere like Yale and you start realizing like, oh, every person here, that's like the prerequisite just to get into this.
Well, yeah. And even so, it's funny because I never really heard of prep school. Like the only context I heard of prep school in was like someone got sent away because they like did something bad. Like it's just not the same sort of culture in Oregon or in the Pacific Northwest as it is in the Northeast. And so I went to this prep school, went to that prep school, and I quickly realized that meant that these kids had been studying their asses off really hard on a whole other level than I was used to. So that was an adjustment period for sure. But it's all worked out.
Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do at that time in your life, or were you just kind of like, let's see where this road takes me? The major in economics. I know I probably want to be in business at something or somewhere. I don't know if I want to start one. Where were you in terms of like what you want to do with your career at that point?
Ultimately, I think that untraditional upbringing sort of paired with this education was an interesting inflection point in my life, which was the aperture was a little bit wider for me on kind of like the expected path, so to speak. Again, starting out there, my freshman year, people were like, well, you got to get the investment banking internship. You got to get the consulting internship, that kind of stuff. And again, not trying to be an idiot, but I was kind of like, what? Like I didn't have any role models that had done that, right? It's not like my uncle, my dad, my friends, best friend's father, mother, whatever, were doing these jobs. But that was the case for so many of my classmates, right? They were like, oh, this is the thing that you do with this degree. This is the next like step on this kind of like paved ladder, corporate ladder, so to speak. And so much to the surprise of a lot of my classmates, they were like, okay, so you're doing the internship and you're going to get the thing and we're going to get the signing bonus when we're 21 and move to New York City and whatever. And I honestly was just like, nah, I'm good. Like, no, not for me. And people were shocked, particularly because the money that was being offered around this 2006 pre-credit crisis in Wall Street, a lot of, still obviously a ton of money on Wall Street, but like even pre-crash, kids are getting offered 120 grand out of college, a $20,000 signing bonus. Like, that's real money for anyone, let alone, 21, 22-year-old kid. And I just looked at that and I said, maybe at some point I'll do that, but that doesn't appeal to me. If people say, great, what are you going to do? There's always people recruiting us for these jobs. And I said, I'm going to take a backpack and a surfboard. I've been painting houses in the summer. I've saved up a few $1,000 bucks. And I'm going to buy a one-way ticket and see how far I can stretch a few $1,000 bumming around the world. And I give a lot of credit to my parents. My parents have been incredible influences, but it also would have been easy. And there's certainly a lot of parents that have been like, are you kidding me? You just got this education. Like, go put it to use. Like, you're going to go bum around the world by yourself. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah. But they weren't that way. They said, great. They believed in both the traditional education in the classroom, but also the education of the world, the education of adventure, the education of actually mixing it up, getting yourself in tough spots and having to get out. And I'll tell you what, this was a time, 2007, it dates the story a little bit, but I was traveling without a cell phone. There wasn't internet and Wi-Fi everywhere. So I was having to make do with meeting people. I hitchhiked through the entire country, New Zealand, slept on floors and couches in Fiji, Australia, Southeast Asia. But then it actually led to a massive tragedy. And what ended up being a huge turning point in my life overall, which is I found myself on this beach in rural Thailand. And there were these guys jumping a flaming jump rope. And I was like, oh, this looks like fun. Maybe 22-year-old kid without fully formed prefrontal cortex. Like, well, what could possibly go wrong here? And in an instant, my life changed. I tripped on the rope. There was excess kerosene. It sprayed my entire body. My body lit on fire to my neck. And I actually had to jump into the ocean to extinguish the flames. But not before about 25% of my body was burned, predominantly my legs and feet. And I'm in the middle of nowhere in Thailand. I'm in an island in the Gulf of Thailand. So instead of an ambulance ride, I had a moped ride down a dirt path to a one-room nursing shack, basically, where I was so beat up they couldn't move me. So I underwent 8 surgeries in this rural area of Thailand. There was a cat running around my bed and across my chest. I mean, not where you want to be with any injury, but particularly an injury like this, where infection is a massive risk and other things. But the worst part about it was, there was a moment about 4 or 5 days in where the Thai doctor walks in, and he's just being blunt. He's not trying to be mean or anything. He's just trying to be honest. He's like, look, Colin, I hate to tell you this, but you will probably never walk again normally. Your ligaments have been so badly burned in this fire that you're probably never going to regain full mobility in your ankles, your knees, etc. And, there's one thing, the physical pain is something, you break a bone, you get scraped up, you burn in this case, it sucks. But the emotional pain of that was just a whole other level. Like, I go from being this athletic, kid with a bright future to who am I if I'm not going to be able to walk again normally? And that downward spiral goes pretty deep. Now, there is again, I mentioned my parents. There is a heroine to the story, which is my mother. She shows up on like day 4 or day 5, kind of around the same time period. And she tells me now that she was crying and pleading with the doctors in the hallways for good news. And I can imagine what it'd be like to be a parent in this state. But she actually never showed me this fear. Instead, she came into my hospital room every single day with this huge smile on her face, like this huge air of positivity, just being like, yeah, this sucks. You got yourself into a bad spot, but like, you've got a full life ahead of you. What do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. Like, let's visualize a bright future. And I at first didn't want to play along. I was like so beat up, but she just got kept at me, positivity. And I finally, she said, close your eyes, picture something. So I closed my eyes this day in the hospital, and she sees me smile. She goes, what'd you see? And I said, oh, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I just saw myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon. And I know she could have easily been like, yeah, I said set a goal, but like the legs and the burn, like maybe like something a little more realistic. But instead she was like, great. In fact, I think you should start training right now. And she goes, hey, doc. She yells over at the Thai doctor, my son's training for a triathlon. You need to bring him in some weights. I have this like grainy picture of me with 10-pound dumbbells in my hands, bandage from the waist down, both legs. And this Thai doctor looking at me like I'm some crazy idiot American. I'm like, hey doc, I'm training for a triathlon, man. And he's just like, yo, someone needs to knock some sense in this kid.
Yeah, like I don't think you remember our conversation like 2 days ago. Yeah.
But in the end, I mean, it was a huge turning point in my life. I'm passionate about talking about mindset. I do a lot of public speaking around that. My new book, The 12-Hour Walk, is the subtitles: Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, Unlock Your Best Life. We can talk more about what that's all about. But my mother instilled in me in this moment something I take with me my whole life, is what I call a possible mindset. I call it that. Just it's an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life of limitless possibilities. This moment, knowing your darkest moment, being like, Fine, but what still is possible? What can I still create, even from this dark moment? I mean, you can liken that to entrepreneurship, right? You start the business, you this thing's going wrong. How do you pivot? How do you adapt? How do you evolve? What are those endless possibilities? So fast forward, it takes me several months to finally get released from Thailand. I'm still bandaged up. I get carried on and off the plane. I'm in a wheelchair when I get home. Slowly, I learn how to walk literally one step at a time, but I'm finally like, yo, I got to get out of my parents' basement and start my career. So I do take a job, not an investment banking job, but a commodities trading job in Chicago. And I take a commodities trading job in Chicago. I'm literally wearing slippers when I take the interview because my feet are still badly burned. I can't even wear shoes. The guys are making fun of me, but they take pity on me, I guess, and hire me anyways. But I joined the local gym. I trained for this triathlon. You know, I'm walking a little bit now. I'm jogging a little bit now. And I finally, 18 months after being burned in this fire, I raced the Chicago Triathlon. Finished the race, which is amazing. But to my complete and utter surprise, I don't actually just finish the race, but I actually win the entire Chicago Triathlon, placing first out of nearly 5,000 other people on the day.
Wait. Now, real quick, can you what are the distances on that, on the triathlon?
Yeah, so this is an Olympic distance triathlon. So it was a mile of swimming, 25 miles of biking, and 6.2 miles running 10K. So that's a standard, what's known as the Olympic distance. Got it. But you know, the moral of the story isn't like, oh, so it turns out I'm a superhuman athlete. I'm just a freaking badass. And like, what, I mean, that's not like, it couldn't be further from the truth. What I realized is that we have these inflection points in our life. And I think the most important muscle any of us has is actually the 6 inches between our ears, our minds. And my mother in this dark phase taught me this important lesson. And had she not instilled me with that, I know where my head was at. I know the darkness that was going to envelop me. I certainly wouldn't be sitting here with 10 world records. It's important to note, like, I've set 10 world records now with those legs. Those weren't rare records I set and then I got burned. Those have all happened on the other side of this. And so on one hand, I wouldn't wish the pain of my burn accident on my worst enemy. But on the other hand, I look at it and go, man, I learned some of life's greatest lessons, overcoming that adversity, moving through that, and allowing that now to be, you know, fuel in my gas tank, so to speak, to push me to higher heights.
Yeah, literally. So real quick, on just as a side note, what does it look like to be able to train for something like that and actually win? Because there's a difference between like, oh, I finished something and it's a great personal milestone, but to come into a triathlon, it's your first one and you beat everybody. were you expecting those results at all? Like, when during your training, were you training to get like the best time, or did you just get out there and then you're like, I actually feel really great right now?
I mean, you know, I was training, you know, been a, you know, elite athlete as a swimmer, but I never biked or run competitively. And most of this was just a personal goal for me. So I had no idea. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to win this. In fact, when I crossed the finish line, I still didn't know that I was going to win this, because the way triathlon works at a big race like that is you can't have 5,000 people all dive into the water and they drown each other. Right. So you do it in waves of like 100 people spaced out every 5 minutes. So people are starting anywhere over a 3-hour period of time, and people are finishing anywhere over a 3-hour period of time. And then at the end, obviously, you're the when you start and when you finish ends up being your time. And so I knew that no one had passed me at the end of that, but I was like, whatever, there's thousands of people out here. I've never done this before. So my grandmother lived in Chicago. And so she meets me at the finish line, you know, gives me a nice, oh, grandma hug. Oh, congratulations. You did great. You know, whatever, we go get breakfast. And then I'm walking away to pick up my bike in the transition area, and I hear my name getting called over the loudspeaker. And my first thought is, shit, what did I do? Like, did I break a rule, or did I like step off the court? You know, I'm getting disqualified or something. The guy's like, Colin O'Brady. I finally walk up. I'm like, what? And he's like, we've been calling your name for the last 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's like, you won. And he hands me this plaque. It's like first place overall. And I'm like, wait, what? So I literally didn't even know until I finished it. I did. I literally, in a kind of interesting twist of fate, another guy in the financial industry who was a friend of mine, not someone I was working for, but a mentor of mine, became a mentor of mine. He found out about the story not long after, and he said, man, this is incredible. And I said, I've always wanted to be an Olympic athlete. And he actually offered to become my first sponsor, which, by the way, was far less lucrative than, you know, other professional sports or the career path I was on, but just enough to sleep on some couches and race and trade my bike. So I went in and actually basically quit my job on Monday, quit the commodities job and became a full-time professional triathlete. I raced triathlon for the next 6 or 7 years all over the world, 25 countries, 6 continents for the U.S. national team, which again, was a pretty large departure, in the same part and parcel of being at Yale with the economics degree and not taking, the iBanking or consulting job. It's the same thing. I had this, finally get my foot, my career is going in a positive direction. I get this opportunity. I'm like, all right, peace. I'm out. Moved. Yeah, I'm done. I'm going to go do this other thing. People are like, professional triathlon, that's not like a career. That's like a hobby, man. I'm like, it's an Olympic sport. And they're like, yeah, but still, that's not like, but play this out. Like you do this, even if you made the Olympics, like, okay, you're 30 some years old and you can swim, bike, and run fast. Like, what's that going to do for you in the long run? I've been able to do very well for myself in business over the years, but it's been untraditional. It's been by following my heart, following my passion, pivoting, evolving, shifting, building businesses, building these world record projects. But it hasn't been the most traditional or linear path. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I know you said that you have started and exited a couple of businesses. Where along the way did those come in? During the triathlon stuff, after, talk me through that timeline.
Yeah, for sure. The most recent exit happened last year. So I was an 8-figure exit of a events company that I started. But I'll bring it back because I know that this obviously the name of the show is Build Your Network. So there's like the story of my life, man. Basically, I raced triathlon for 6 or 7 years. I get some decent support here and there, but I'm just covering costs. And I'm like, I want to do something bigger. And so I set this goal for myself. And it's something I'm pretty novice at, was just mountain climbing, to see if I could set the world record for something called the Explorers Grand Slam. So that's to climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, Everest, Denali, Kilimanjaro, et cetera, as well as go to the North and South Pole. But in world record time, no one, 50 people had done this, but they did it in 5 years, 10 years. And I was like, can I do it consecutively, back to back, boom, boom, boom. And if I do so, can I drum up some like media attention and some sponsors and whatever? And I also want to start a nonprofit that was all around inspiring kids around health and wellness, which ultimately I've had over 1 million students enrolled in those programs over years. But my wife and I dreamed this up. My wife's been my business partner for a long time. We dreamed this up. And then we get back to our 1-bedroom apartment. And we're like, we do a little spreadsheet. Like, so how much does this actually cost? Just the logistics, like getting to Everest, North Pole, South Pole, getting dropped off, helicopters, all the shit that goes into doing some ridiculous thing like that. And we quickly look at a spreadsheet. It's like $500,000, $500,000. And we've got we're in our late 20s. I've been racing triathlon, which makes no money. I've got our full life savings. We liquidate everything's like $10,000, period. Yeah. And this is the moment where most ideas die, right? And again, it's that limiting belief. It's that limiting belief mindset, that mindset that the entire 12-hour walk book is about, a way for people to overcome this mindset. But more than anything, it's like, you're looking at it and you're like, okay, cool. So that was a fun little dream, but $500,000 to go climb some mountains around the world. And you're like, nobody, no one gives a shit about you. How is that going to work? Yeah. But instead, the possible mindset says, you know what? Those are limiting beliefs. And I can see all the reasons why this doesn't work. But the possible mindset opens up the limitless possibilities of okay, but how could we do this? What do we have? What assets, what bullets do we have in our chamber? No matter, maybe they're not bullets. They're like BB guns, but we got something. What do we got? Okay. We got $10,000. We got $10,000. We got the internet. We can start emailing random people. We can stalk people on LinkedIn or whatever. What are we going to do with the $10,000? Well, the first thing we do is we say, let's put up a legit website. You want to raise $500,000? You better look like this is a real thing. Right. And so we did that. We went to a creative agency. We'd never done that before. The creative agency quickly told us that it would cost, $50,000 or whatever to do the thing. But they took pity on us based on, because we wanted to build out a brand, an idea, and all this kind of stuff. They took pity on us. Okay, we love this nonprofit idea. We love the couple of young hustlers. We'll do a little bit of this for pro bono, and you pay us $10,000 for it. So we have this website. And I always joke with my wife in that moment. I was like, so that's our whole life savings. What if no one cares about this project? The likelihood of someone giving us $500,000 is extremely low. And she kind of looks at me like, yeah, well, at least we'll have a cool website. So for the next 18 months, we hustle, man. Like we knock on every door, both literal, figurative, show up at every cocktail party, shake every hand, just the sniff of a lead, like someone being like, oh, I heard my friend's best friend's cousin's uncle worked at Intel 4 years ago. Maybe you should have a coffee with him. And, like, just like chasing the wildest of loose ends. And it doesn't get us that far. I mean, to be perfectly honest, we raised a little bit of money, but we're still several $100,000 short. And in 2 months, I'm supposed to be leaving to embark on this because we had to set a date. Like, you got to leave. There's a certain time window, weather windows where you can even do these mountains and set it up. And we've got a date on the calendar. And we have enough to pay for like the first expedition, but there's 8 other ones that we literally just straight up don't have the money, time, whatever. We've told everyone, every person for a year, we're doing this, I'm doing this, I'm leaving on this date, like whatever. So my buddy says, dude, come to this spin class with me at this local 24-hour fitness by your house. And I'm like, bro, I'm a professional athlete. I'm not going to a Sunday morning, like, group fitness class at the whatever. Like, my ego's getting the better of me at this moment. And he's like, I don't know, man. There's this woman. She's a world record holder. I think you just like to meet her. She's cool. You're trying to break a world record. She's a friend of mine. I'm like, all right, fine. So I show up, walk into the spin class. So just like 55-year-old woman. She's like already sweating because she's like hitting it hard before the class even starts. She's obviously super fit. And my buddy introduces me to her. He goes, Colin, this is Kathy. Kathy had the world record for the 5K. And Kathy laughed. She's like, oh my God, Angela, you're bringing that up? That's a million years ago. I was like I was 19 when that happened, whatever, a long time ago. I'm like, wow, that's cool. She goes, tell her about what you're doing. So I just give her this quick little 30-second spiel, I'm trying to climb these mountains. I'm trying to start this nonprofit, blah, blah, blah. This is why I'm doing it. She's like, oh, that's cool. And that's it. End of the conversation. Get on my spin bike, start spinning. And I'm thinking, why am I in this 24-hour fitness spin class? Like, what the hell am I doing here? Get off my spin bike. I'm wiping the bike down like everyone does at the end of the class, get their sweat off the seat and whatever. And she calls me back over. She goes, oh, wow, I've been thinking about that during that ride. That's so cool that you're doing that. She goes, my husband loves stuff like this. And she goes, you should tell him about it. And she waves this guy over from the corner of the room. They weren't next to each other before. They spin separately, I guess. That's how their marriage rolls. And he waves over. And she goes, tell him. And again, I'm like, I've told 1,000 people this at this point. And there's like, it's just always a dead end. And I just like, I rattle it off, just like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, whatever. And the guy kind of perks up and he goes, this is cool. He's like, you didn't mention sponsors, but are you trying to like get sponsors for this or something like that? And I was like, yes, I am. In fact, I am. And he goes, because the company I work for, might be interested in supporting this. And I was like, great. What company do you work for? And he goes, I work for Nike. And like, I'm in Portland, Oregon. I think Nike for any professional athletes, like, iconic of all kind of, but I'm from Portland, Oregon. That's like the global headquarters there. It's like the dream scenario. Right. And I'm like, oh my God, Nike. And he goes, yeah. Let me give you my contact info. Do you have a website or something? You can send it over. I'm like, I do. Turns out I do. And then he wrestles through his gym bag and he's like, let me get you a card. Pulls out a card from his bag, hands it to me. I look down. Mark Parker, CEO, Nike.
Wow.
And
oh my God.
Obviously, it changed the entire trajectory of this project. At this point, the trajectory of my career, etc. But I've thought about that story many times. Obviously, a huge turning point in my life. And you ask the question, it's easy to go, well, shit, man, did you just get lucky? Like, you just got lucky. You met freaking Mark Parker in a spin class and Nike sponsored your first project. Like, did you just get lucky? And there's a little bit of luck there, but I love something my mom said to me a long time throughout my life. She goes, luck comes to those who are prepared. You make your own luck, right? Which is, I don't know. Was I lucky that 18 months before that I started knocking on doors? Was I lucky that I like put my life savings into a website? Was I lucky that 1,000 people said no? Here's the thing. 1,000 people said no. Thank you for all those 1,000 people who said no, because they helped me refine my pitch so that when I was pitching and I didn't even know I was pitching, I actually had a cohesive thought and message and thought and process and elevator pitch apparently came out smooth. So the point being is, man, I know this about building your network. A lot of my career, in fact, most of my career has been built on relationships, has been built on shaking hands, meeting people. But here's the thing. It's easy to get stuck into, and I'd love to hear your point of view on this, Travis, but it's easy to be like, oh, this is an important contact. I got to go talk to this guy or this woman or that or whatever. Like, that's important. The thing about this story is I thought I was just talking to a guy in a spin class, meaning there's a lesson in treat every single person you are around with common decency. Show your passion, show your excitement, whether it's this person sitting next to you on the subway or you're in a Fortune 100, corner office, pitching. Like, that is the passion. That's the abundance mindset that ultimately generates energy to you over time, not just trying to like fake it to be like in the right room with the right person. Obviously that strategic things are important, but I think there is something about just putting your whole heart on your sleeve, no matter what instance you're talking to, because you never know who you're talking to in that moment.
Yeah, dude. I second that 100%. Cause like you said, it's just a matter of putting yourself in the right situations enough times, meeting the right people, and having a good attitude that people can get on board with. You know what I mean? Cause like, it's tough. It's tough sometimes when you're in the middle of that, when you're in the thick of it and you're feeling burnt out, you're feeling exhausted, you're feeling skeptical, you're feeling negative about your odds, your chances, right? I mean, like you have like whatever, $300,000-$400,000 left to raise and you got a month to do it. And you've been working on it for 18 months. You've been pitching hundreds of people. And it's like, oh, my buddy wants me to go to the spin class at the local 24-hour fitness to meet a girl who had a record in a 5K 25 years ago. Like, this is clearly a dead end. It's going to be a waste of time. Nothing's going to come from it. I'm just going to stay home. Easily could have said that. And you and I probably wouldn't even be having this conversation today.
Truth.
You know what I'm saying?
Truth.
But instead you shed the ego and the goal still needed to be reached, and it wasn't reached yet. And so you shed the ego, you put in the work, you went to the spin class, met the girl, left a good enough impression for her to introduce you to her husband, who happened to be the freaking CEO of Nike. So punchline of the story is basically they end up sponsoring the whole thing.
Yeah, they come on board, they bridge the gap of what I need. And
multiple six-figure sponsorship essentially to get the
and it was interesting because they wrote a big check, which was huge, and then there was a couple other people kind of waiting in the wings. That was sort of like, if you get a big sponsorship, there's kind of that domino effect, and obviously Nike has that kind of sway. So I kind of was able to call back a few other folks who've been like, well, hey, now and they're like, oh shoot, like they're on, and that helped as well. But they did sponsor the project. I set my first 2 world records for the Explorers Grand Slam and the 7 summits, and that really got me going on what I've been doing over the last 6 or 7 years since then. Like I said, a solo first person across Antarctica solo unsupported. I rowed a boat across Drake Passage, the most dangerous ocean crossing in the world, from South America to Antarctica, an open hole rowboat, 28-foot rowboat. Several other big records and big adventures. And always done it in a way it's always about sharing those stories with others in a way to inspire and uplift, whether that's, from an entrepreneurial side, whether that's from a business mind, whether that's from creativity, art, music, family, etc. I think there's just lessons to be learned when we step outside of our comfort zone, when we grow, when we push ourselves. For me, I've come to, and this is a kind of a core thought from my new book, The 12-Hour Walk, which I'm super passionate about. My first book, The Impossible First, was a New York Times bestseller. It's about my solo Antarctica crossing. And this new book is all about stories of adventure, but told through the lens of prescriptive advice. How I've been in those limiting mindsets many times. I don't have enough money. I don't have the right friends. I don't have the right community. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if people criticize me? All the shit that we've all had go through our heads multiple times if you've ever tried to do anything. But it's a way to combat that. And I could talk more about it, but its central theme is really this invitation for people to take a 12-hour walk of their own. There's a whole origin story around it, but that's to walk out your front door, put your phone on airplane mode, and go for a 12-hour walk. No music, no podcast, nothing, as a deep dive into your mind to reflect on what's going on. The world is so busy in this moment in time that we rarely take these moments to reflect, but these inflection points sounds like a lot, 12 hours, but it's one day that will imprint. I've seen this change people's lives in one single day. They come back from this walk and they are forever changed in a positive way. So my goal is to inspire 10 million people to take the walk. What I was saying before is I've come to kind of think of life on this spectrum of 1 to 10. Kind of ones being our low moments, our lowest moments, like that burn accident in Thailand, or, any other tragedy that befalls us, or just, the tough things that happen in life. Like we know these ones, right? And the 10s are these highest highs. My childhood dream was to summit Mount Everest. I've been able to do that twice now, literal mountaintops in my life, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have, it could be achievement, it could be falling in love, could be the day your first child is born. Those are these 10s. And I've come to think, I realize everyone wants the 10s. Who doesn't want to have the 10s? Surf the perfect wave, ski the deep pow, fall in love, have the best sex, whatever, like the 10s. Everyone wants the 10s. But when I really think about my 10s in my life, what I've come to realize is I didn't get there in spite of my ones. I got there because of my ones. My ones and 10s, our ones and 10s, everyone's ones and 10s, they're connected, man. Like they're connected. But what ends up happening is no one wants to experience the ones. No one wants to grind for 18 months with 1,000 doors slammed in their face. They just want the moment where Nike writes the big check to them. Yeah. And here's the thing. If you hedge against the ones, too many people, I say most people in our modern society live a life of what I call the zone of comfortable complacency between 4 and 6. It's like they got a job, they don't love it. They don't hate it. It's fine. 5 every day, 5 going to the office, 5, or maybe in a relationship for a while. It's not toxic. It's not abusive. It's not like terrible, but it's just like you're cohabitating, you're coexisting. It's just like 5, because people are so afraid to be uncomfortable, to be outside of that comfort zone, to have a little bit of adversity in their life that they're willing to settle for the 5. But what happens when you try to hedge against the ones is you take the 10s off the table too. And so a big part of this 12-hour walk, a big part of my mission is spreading the word of saying like, hey, shake it up. Walking alone in silence for 12 hours. I'm guessing you've never done that before. Like that won't be a 5. You might think it's the stupidest idea you've ever heard, but I guarantee you it will not be a 5. And every person I've known to get back to their front door is experience a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10, a moment of fulfillment, of gratitude, of depth of mind, of spirit. And for me, I think that's where the juice of life, you got to be at 5 some of the days, but a life lived only between that 4 and 6, to me, that's the worst life of them all.
Yeah. It's a life that'll end up with probably the most regret, which is probably the most ironic part about it, right? Because people that live that type of a life would probably claim that the reason that they live life that way is so they don't have regret. But if you get to the end of life and realize that you never took any risks, you never did what you wanted to do, you never did what you loved to do, you never spent as much time with the people that you wanted to, and you realize that you could have had some control over that by just letting go of a little bit of, quote unquote security, which at the end of the day isn't really security anyway. Like that's got to be a bummer to come to terms with, because it's going to be a lot more difficult to make that 12-hour walk when you're 93 than it is when you're 36 or 48 or what.
I did just have a guy email me. He's 81 years old. And he said he went 36 miles yesterday for his 12-hour walk. I was blown away. I'm actually getting on a Zoom call because I want to hear his whole story. I do say the 12-hour walk meets you where you're at. So I don't care if you go for 1 mile. I don't care if you go for 50 miles. Take as many breaks as you want. The exercise is really a power of the mind. My 77-year-old mother-in-law did it by walking one time around her block, sitting on her porch in silence for an hour, and then taking another walk around the block. I've had ultra marathon friends do 50 some miles, but neither one of those people are doing it better or worse. It meets you right where you're at. But what you said about regrets, I'm smiling big, because the opening story in the 12-hour walk is a story from my life that is just, I won't go too long form, but in short order, I got invited to give a speech to a big group of Wall Street bankers, 500, person audience, all from the biggest banks and hedge funds, et cetera. The night before, I get invited to a small or intimate gathering with 8 of the CEOs. These are guys that are, billionaires, centimillionaires, very, very successful, wealthy group of folks in this Manhattan penthouse. And I'm known for always wearing a black t-shirt and a low top pair of Jordans and a pair of jeans, no matter where I go on the stages or whatever. I come as I am. So I show up in the lobby of this beautiful Manhattan building, and I almost can't get past the doorman, because the doorman's like, I'm like, I think I'm on the list for this dinner party in the penthouse. And he looks at me and he literally goes, hey man, if you're with catering, I've told you this a million times, you've got to use the service elevator. I'm like, oh yeah, whatever. But they do eventually let me up there. We have this dinner. This guy, everyone's, you can picture it, New York City, suited and booted, custom suits, $100,000 watches, whatever. And it's an interesting conversation. You know, these guys are asking me, oh, did you see any dead bodies when you climbed Everest? You know, whoa, you rode this boat across, how little boat out there. I've been on a big, huge, you know, yacht, and it's not, you know, I can't even imagine, you know, whatever. We're having some interesting conversations and some dialogue. But one of my favorite questions that I love to, you know, kind of turn the table on people is I say, look, Everest was my childhood dream. But what's your Everest? What was your Everest? I'm sitting there with these guys who are, you know, seemingly the most successful, you know, kind of the archetype of success and prosperity, right? Like these guys have won at life. And it's an older gentleman. The average age is probably 65, 70 years old in the room. And I asked this question, so what's your Everest? And I've asked this to school kids. I've asked this to business owners. I've asked this to people. People usually have an answer and the room goes silent. Just goes silent. It's kind of one of those weird, like awkward pauses in a dinner that's been like high vibes. Everyone's chatting, whatever. And we've all been in like that awkward moment where like someone says something and you're like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And so the conversation like stalls out and then just kind of picks up on a different track. No one says anything. I'm like, okay, well, that was a little weird, but whatever. So I'm getting up, the dinner's done, you know, dessert plates are cleared. I'm getting ready to go and I'm about to walk down into the elevator. And this guy, the oldest guy at the table, comes up and he grabs me by the shoulder gently. He's probably, I'd guess 75, 80 years old. And he goes, hey, Colin, you know, thanks for spending the evening with us. It was a real treat. I just wanted to say something before you go. You asked us all a pretty important question back there, and I'm sorry for myself and the rest of us that no one answered. He goes, and he says it somehow without an ounce of bluster. I mean, this guy's, you know, very successful guy, but he goes, you know, I've made more money than you can possibly imagine in my life. He goes, but there's not a day, not a single day. This guy's 80 years old that I don't go back to being a 14-year-old kid at summer camp on this rowboat in the Catskills and think back, how would life have turned out if I had had the gumption to ask myself that question? Not what's the Everest that what everyone else wanted me to climb or the world tells me is great, but what was my Everest? What was my Everest? And he looks at me going to your exact point and expresses this moment of regret as if he feels like he missed something. And it was so poignant for me. And there's a reason I opened the book this way of to say, look, I'm proud of the financial success that I've had in my life. And I don't think this guy was trying to vilify money. And the point of the story is not to say, well, it must mean you don't make money or don't have a career or whatever. Like that's not the point. But the point is that somebody else's life, living somebody else's and making certain choices about what you do or how you spend your time, you can end up on the top of the wrong mountain, man, quite literally. And getting to the end of your life at 80 years old with that regret, that's a tough way to go because it's hard to turn back the clock. Now, I would say to somebody who's 80, well, you've still got a few years left, maybe, or maybe a decade. You know, what do you want to do with that time? But it's different than if you're talking to somebody who's, you know, in the 30s or 40s or still has a lot of time on the clock, so to speak. And that 12-hour walk is also a way to that, is a check-in. It's a way to say, look, I got a busy life. I got a career. I got kids. I got a job. I got this. But if I take this one day and look in the mirror at myself in this silence, in the stillness, it's going to be hard. It's going to be outside of my comfort zone. We know in those moments, if we're walking down a path that's going to get us to be the old man at that elevator offering regrets. And no one wants to be that guy. No one wants to be that guy. So take that time to look inward. And only you can answer the question of what that Everest is for you.
The 12-hour walk. If you guys haven't already picked up a copy of this during this interview, please go do it right now. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just go pick up a copy of this book and take the challenge. I know something that I'll definitely be considering. Just got done after my foot heals anyway. I just got done with a 38-mile run that a couple buddies of mine and I did like a week and a half ago. And nice. Have some sort of like torn or partially torn ligament in my foot. So I'm kind of limping at the moment. But yeah, that was about 9 hours that it took us to do that. We started at midnight and went to about 9 a.m. And you learn a lot about yourself. And,
no doubt.
Doing something like that. So I got to ask you this question before I let you go, bro. Of all the things that you've done, what would you say was the most physically challenging? And then what was the most mentally challenging?
Good question. Physically challenging, gosh, hard to make it more challenging than pulling a 375-pound sled solo 1,000 miles across Antarctica. That definitely tested my physical limits. And what was the most difficult about that was what I was doing was unsupported. So no resupplies of food or fuel. And that's why my sled was so heavy, it was full of food. but I was on a 3,000 calorie deficit from day one. So I was burning 10,000 plus calories, and then 7,000 was the most I could carry in my sled per day and still get to the end. And I got to the end of my last bite of food. So
wow,
pulling that at 54 days alone in Antarctica. And people had tried this before me. A guy had died after 71 days a couple years before me. He didn't make it to the end. Somebody ran out of food and had to get evacuated. So it's right on the edge of the sort of physical limits of like literally not enough food or calories in your body to have the expenditure in this harsh place of Antarctica that's, you know, trying to kill you with its minus 40-degree temperatures and all this. So physically, of course, that was a deep cut mentally as well, and has formed a lot of my mental resilience and formed a lot of stuff. But I would know the one that gets me mentally, again, it's so hard to pick from all these things, but the rowboat, Drake Passage, 28-foot rowboat, 40-foot swells, the roughest ocean in the world, open hole. We're rowing in this, me and my teammates were rowing in a sequence of 90 minutes on, 90 minutes off, because we have to keep the boat in perpetual motion. You can't just stop. You'll like fly backwards with so much currents and storms in this ocean, 750-mile channel. And we're soaking wet. The ocean is actually freezing. It's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but the salt water makes it till it doesn't freeze, but there's icebergs in the water. And so the waves are crashing us in the face. And how after so many days, you're sleep deprived, you're wet, you're cold. And that sounds physical. That's emotional, man. Like that is the mental breaking point. There's a reason why, you know, water torture is a thing and sleep deprivation is what they do to torture you at a prison camp or whatever. And so that definitely put the limits on the mental for sure. So, yeah, man.
Crazy stuff, bro. It's been a really fun conversation. Look forward to doing it again, maybe sometime in person. But I appreciate you coming on the show. Please, seriously, if you're listening to this, go pick up a copy of the 12-Hour Walk. Follow Colin on social media. Anytime you follow somebody that does the things that Colin does, you're going to find yourself constantly inspired and motivated. And one thing I think that I've found is that you find yourself putting your daily struggles into perspective when you hear about the things that the human body and the human mind can endure. It makes you really take a second look about some of the things that maybe you've let overwhelm you that shouldn't be, frankly. And so it's always been a super helpful thing for me to follow people like this. So please go give Colin a follow. Tell him you heard about him here on the show. Colin, thanks so much for spending some time today. Sorry to go a little bit over, but this is some really good stuff. So I appreciate it.
It's great, man. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.